Welcome back to Blumira Briefings, your weekly download of the top headlines and trends for your security practice. This week, CISA put 4 actively exploited flaws on the federal shot clock to pass. Someone claiming to be your IT support would like a word with your users on Teams. And self-hosted Gitea servers are greeting total strangers as admins. So let's Gitea up and get down to it. Ugh. CISA added 4 vulnerabilities to its known exploited vulnerabilities catalog this week, and all 4 are being used in attacks right now. The list covers Adobe ColdFusion, which is a critical flaw that lets attackers run code on unpatched servers without any login, 2 Joomla page builder plugins that are being used to plant web shells on live sites, and Langflow, a platform for building AI workflows, where intruders have been chaining flaws to steal cloud credentials and AI provider keys. Federal agencies have until today to patch these, and KEV said exploitation of the ColdFusion flaw started less than 2 hours after the technical details went public, so, don't sit on those. So, Matt, what's the immediate priority for teams that are facing these new KEV additions?
When I saw this story, I actually laughed a little bit, not because vulnerabilities are funny. No, they're serious, but because 2 of the pieces of technology, 2 of the software names just took me back by 20 years. Joomla and ColdFusion. I spent years building and maintaining websites for publishing companies, and some of them were built in Joomla, and I also had more than a few run-ins with ColdFusion back in the days of Macromedia. So if you had asked me, 10 years ago if we'd still be talking about either one, the response would be a flat no. And that's why this story is important. CISA has added vulnerabilities affecting ColdFusion, Joomla Page Builder, and the AI workflow platform Langflow to its catalog of known exploited vulnerabilities. That means they're not theoretical, they're not proof of concept, they're actively being exploited in the wild. Now, it's really easy to assume that a piece of technology that isn't making headlines anymore has disappeared, but in reality, a lot of enterprise software has incredibly long lifespans. That ColdFusion application might be, running an employee portal that no one wants to replace because it simply works. There may be a Joomla site that's a customer portal, an intranet, or, a marketing site that's just kind of quietly been online for 15 years without anyone thinking about it. I've seen it happen, and I've had to clean up the what's the word I'm looking for? The mess. We'll just leave it at that. And then you've got Langflow, which is the opposite side of the story, right? It's a modern AI platform that's quickly gaining adoption. In one CISA advisory, you've got software that's been around for decades sitting next to one of the newest categories of enterprise software. Different generations, same outcome. Attackers found a way in. Now, for MSPs, the takeaway here isn't just to patch specific vulnerabilities. It's a reminder to inventory the systems that have quietly faded into the background over the years. It happens. There's those forgotten applications that often end up with the biggest blast radius because everyone always assumes someone else is taking care of them. Sometimes the software that keeps you up at night isn't the new technology. It's that server that's been sitting in the corner doing its job for years.
Next up, some unteamly Teams behavior. Palo Alto's Networks Unit 42 is warning about a campaign targeting Microsoft Teams users with fake tech support. It's a funnel. You get an email inviting you to take a survey. If you open the attached PDF, a Teams call follows shortly after from a systems administrator who doesn't actually work at your company, dialing in from an outside tenant. The rep gets the target to hand over remote control. Teams has a built-in feature for that. Walks them through installing other legitimate remote desktop tools, and then uses that access to plant EtherRat, a Trojan that keeps the operators in the machine long after the call ends. And then from there, stealing files and data and what have you. And speaking of Teams, put me in, coach. So, why Teams? Well, just last week, I said default settings is one of the scariest phrases you can hear in a production environment. And here's Exhibit B. Email has 20 years of scar tissue and built up muscle memory to defend, right? Filters, warning banners, awareness training, a user base that's been burned before and may get burned again. Teams has very little of that. The call rings through to the real client inside a tool your company told you to trust with a, convincing looking logo on it. And in a lot of tenants, external access is switched on because that's how it ships. Attackers didn't have to break the platform. They just moved to the channel where the trust hasn't been beaten out of us as much yet. And you can tell that the move is paying off by what they're willing to spend on it. I mean, look at the shape of this campaign. An email, then a PDF, then an actual human being on a live voice call. That's staffed attacking. That's payroll, shift schedules, the works, and nobody staffs a funnel that doesn't convert. Every stage filters out for the most people who are most likely to cooperate with the next step. By the time the support rep dials, they already know they've reached somebody who opens attachments from strangers. So, what do you tell your users? Production values on these fakes are good and getting better, so telling them to spot specific tactics is probably going to be a losing game over time. Instead, teach the shape of the attack because it doesn't really change. They contact you from somebody that you didn't ask for. There's urgency that's coming out of nowhere. And, there's an ask to install something or hand over access. Any one of those should be raising red flags. 2 or more should be setting off loud alarms. So, should someone using a remote access tool asking you to install a different remote access tool, but we'll get back to that. Go back to that old standby that dates to those 80s after-school specials and is the same tactic that your grandma used on phone scammers, hopefully. Hang up, call back. Your help desk should work like your bank. You call them through a number or a portal that you already know. And there's a culture element here, too. Make let me call you back through the approved channels something that gets praised at your all hands, not something that makes users feel rude for doing. All right, one more, and it's for the self-hosters. Our last story is Gitea, the self-hosted Git service, where a critical flaw in the official Docker images is now under active exploitation. Those images shipped with a setting that treats every IP address on the internet as a trusted reverse proxy. So on deployments using proxy-based login, an attacker can send one well-crafted HTTP header with a username in it and then get logged in as that user. That includes admin accounts. That doesn't include requiring passwords, tokens, just that header. Sysdig caught the first in the wild exploitation attempt 13 days after the advisory. And a Git server is a bad thing to lose. You've got private repos, CI configs, and every credential that a developer ever committed by accident. The fix is in Gitea 1.26.3 and later. So, Matt, again, what steps should teams take to secure their Gitea Docker environments right now?
For this week's Gitea vulnerability, I wanted to do something a little bit different. Instead of just talking about it, I'm going to patch a Gitea server that I use right here in my own environment. It's a self-hosted instance that's running in Docker, and I use it for personal projects, automation work, proof of concepts for clients I'm working with. The thing about vulnerabilities is that they stop being theoretical the moment they actually take place on your LAN, right? So let's see what's happening, and then we're going to update my instance. The vulnerability we're talking about today is CVE 2026-20896, which affects certain Gitea Docker deployments. It's a critical vulnerability, has a CVSS score of 9.8, and it's currently being exploited in the wild. The issue isn't so much with someone figuring out a way to get into Gitea itself, but how trusted reverse proxies are handled. Gitea supports deployments behind reverse proxies, which is pretty common, right? You may have something like Nginx, Traffic, or Cloudflare, or another gateway sitting in front of an application of your own right now. And that application trusts certain headers from that proxy to identify users, most likely, depending on your configuration. Now, the problem is that affected Docker images were configured with a trusted proxy setting that was entirely too permissive. Essentially, if you had authentication headers enabled through a reverse proxy configuration, an attacker could potentially read those headers themselves and then impersonate another user with them. That's where things get dangerous. When we think about source code repositories, we usually think about code, but that's not really what attackers are looking for. Repositories often contain other details. We've got infrastructure definitions, scripts, tokens, other forms of credentials, API keys. What have I not said so far? There's tons of stuff. We all know this, right? Now, for an MSP, this becomes critical because those repositories don't just contain intellectual property. They contain those details. And they also contain details on multiple customer environments. A compromised source control platform doesn't just expose that IP. It can become a credential theft event that leads to a pathway to other systems. Now let's look at this environment. I actually patched my server last weekend, but I went ahead and grabbed a backup from, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 weeks ago so that it's extra insecure. Now, let's see, what is it running right now? It is running Gitea version 1.24.5, so that's an impacted version. Excellent. I don't know what to say there. All right, let's get into this. The first thing I always do with containerized applications is version lock them. Version locking gives you predictable upgrades. I know exactly what version I'm running. I know it's changed, and if something goes wrong, I have a known rollback point. All right, so as you can see here, my current version of Gitea is 1.245. We're going to just turn this to 1.2.6, save it, and sudo docker compose pull. I think the image is already on this machine. Hey, all right, it is. And now we're just going to start it back up. All right, give that a second or two to do its thing, and reload the page. And reload the page again. All right, we are now running on 1.26.4. That was quick and that was very easy. Now, the takeaway here isn't just patch Gitea, it's that self-hosted applications become part of your security infrastructure whether you plan for them to be or not. Git servers, ticketing systems, monitoring platforms, documentation systems, these are all places where sensitive information ends up at some point. They need the same exact patching discipline that you would apply to firewalls, endpoints, and production servers because attackers aren't always looking for the front door. Sometimes they're looking for the tools we built to help us manage everything behind it.
Thanks, Matt. So to recap, 4 exploited flaws on a federal deadline of today, an unsupportive help desk call, and the Git server took a name tag at face value. Give your users the one rule that survives every support scam. Nobody legit cold calls asking to remote in, and hanging up to call back and confirm is not rude. If the person on the line is really from IT, they'll survive being verified, even if you might be a little bit annoyed. And if Gitea is in your stack, get to current and make sure the only proxy your server trusts is the one that you actually deployed. Until next time, stay safe out there.